So welcome, Pete, and welcome to all of you who are tuning in via the YouTube. How are you today, Pete?
I'm doing well. I'm sat at my desk looking over a lovely sunny West Cardiff. So yeah, happy days.
Lovely. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, cool. So as you can see by the name, my name is Pete. I am a biology graduate from Swansea Uni, and I'm now currently working with the Christian unions in and around Cardiff to put on events just like this to help answer some questions.
Oh, that's amazing. And I also forgot to introduce myself. I'm Amy, and I'll be your host for today. But yeah, thank you all for joining. Also, thank you, Pete, for being willing to answer people's questions on the topic, can God and science belong together? So thank you to all of those of you who sent in your questions. They're fab, and I cannot wait to hear Pete's answers. No pressure. Before we jump into the questions, if anything that Pete says sparks more questions, write them down, and when we're finished here, Pete and I will be in a Zoom room to answer them. Well, maybe more Pete than me. If you'd like to join us there, then message the Cardiff Met Instagram at Cardiff Met CU for the details. Amazing. So let's get started. The first question, Pete, is, does God have a part to play in science? If so, what examples can you give of this?
I would say yes, absolutely. But not in the traditional sense that we kind of get caught up in God has to be a certain science phenomena. He has to be something that happens in science. So God himself is not a natural phenomena, but rather he's the creative mind behind the universe. He's the creative mind behind the rationale we see in science laws, in the natural universe we see around us. He's the thought process and the creator and the rational mind that connects all these things to work together and to link together and to actually exist. My favorite example of this is if you walk into a house and you observe all the different rooms and the staircase and all of that stuff, you wouldn't think the architect is a fireplace, but rather you think the architect is the one who designed the rooms, the one who created it to have the flow, to have the creative architecture behind it. And so we can think of God in the same way, the thought process, the mind behind what we see in the physical universe around us. And that really helps us actually, because it extends us further than the what questions to the why questions, the questions of purpose and meaning, and it can connect us to those things. So yes, God absolutely has a part to play in science, in all science, but he's not the gap that we can't explain. I think we actually have some questions coming up on that.
Yeah, I think we do. That's really helpful. So thank you for that. On to our next question. Is God just an explanation for things we have no current scientific explanation for? And when do we find out, when we do find out a physical explanation for every natural phenomenon, is God no longer relevant?
So this is why it's important that we first of all understand God as that kind of creative mind, as the thinker, thought processor behind the whole universe and the way it works. Because when we plug God into something we don't understand yet, you think of, kind of the ancient thought of there being a sun god and a moon god. As soon as we figure out how the sun works, we can kind of think, oh, well, there's no need for a god. And this is called a kind of a God of the gaps theory. But this thinks of, like I said, it thinks of God in the wrong way. It thinks of him as something in science rather than the thought process over all science. And when we change that perspective to look at God as that creator, that mind, that thinker behind all science, it allows us to know that even if we can answer all questions on science, there will still be some unanswered questions. And these are questions because science doesn't hold a monopoly on all truth. So for instance, when we know everything there is to know about the physical universe around us, that doesn't say anything about why we have morality or ethics or a desire for meaning or a desire for connection or even a desire for there to be a God. And so this is why God is bigger than just explanation for the things we don't yet understand. If we were to plug God into something we don't understand, then yes, absolutely, he'd be a God of the gaps. But he's the creative agent, the thinker, the mind, the instigator of all of the things for science to actually happen, rather than work in science itself.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, that's such a good answer. On to the next question we received. Will the advance of science mean that God will no longer be believed?
So this is kind of the root of a lot of questions that we kind of have. And really it's kind of asking, can science explain everything? And if science can explain everything, then yeah, absolutely, advancement of science will mean that one day we no longer need God. But I don't think that any of us can truly say that science does explain everything. And here's why. Science is an incredible tool. I love it. And I've loved working in multiple labs and out in the field and all these different things across my time studying. And it's incredible, but it can only tell us a limited amount. For instance, we're currently in a time now where vaccines are rolling out at an incredible pace. And it's amazing to see the work that's gone in behind it and the work that everything that's happened to get us to a point where we can fight and defend ourselves from coronavirus. But science can't and doesn't tell us who to give the vaccine to first. It can't tell us that my 70-year-old Gramps is more deserving of it right now than I am. It can tell us that he's more vulnerable, but it doesn't tell us what to do with that information. And that's something that science will never be able to tell us. And so even if we advance to know everything there is to know about science, it can't answer all of our questions. There has to be something else that pushes us to think about morality, about ethics, and about meaning, about purpose. And if we can't find those answers from science, then it means there'll still be unanswered questions. And those are serious questions that we have every day. Constantly, we have to think and wrestle with morality and ethics. Constantly, we have to think about our purpose and our meaning and where we fit. And so being able to answer these questions, and if they're outside of the realms of what science can answer, then I say no, the advancements of science, science cannot explain everything. There has to be another explanation out there for those answers.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that leads quite nicely onto our next question. That is, will God always be the higher being?
Yeah, I think so, absolutely. Because like even from that last question, even if we could understand everything there is to do with science, there's still unanswered questions. And in the same way how we are inside a universe which has fixed science and laws, we're also in a universe which has moral laws that we also think about constantly. C.S. Lewis talks about this much better than I do. So if you're interested, go and check out Mere Christianity, the first couple of chapters. But he talks about this sense that we know what we ought to do, we know how we ought to act, and we know this kind of feeling of joint morality with everyone, just that's kind of implanted on the human race. And that has to be somewhere else from science, because so much of evolution theory points towards survival of the fittest, one above the other, the strongest will survive and carry on. And so that's so interesting that there has to be something outside of that, which is pressing on us to say, you know, I really ought to do good things. I really ought to act in a certain way and be a good person, be a good friend, a good family member, a good anything like that. And so will God always be the higher being? Well, I think that morality, that ethic comes from God. And if it's constantly showing and revealing to us how we should behave and how we should act, which is beyond something that science tells us what to do, then I absolutely think it has to be the higher being. And even just in the nature to be able to create something from nothing, you know, that's the incredible nature of what we see in the Big Bang at the moment. Is there was once nothingness, and then there was something, and that doesn't happen in any other science kind of discovery. We always take something and make it something else, but we've never been able to take nothing and make something. And so absolutely, I think God will always be the higher being.
Yeah, definitely. I know you mentioned a little bit about evolution, and we received quite a few questions about this. So what we've done is we've kind of grouped it into one question that hopefully Pete will answer within this one question, or your questions on evolution. So this question is evolution contradictory to the Bible?
I read a book recently. There's so much writing on this, and I absolutely actually love reading this stuff. The first kind of pages were evolution is true, the Bible is true. Both statements can be correct at the same time. And now this is obviously a perspective of someone who is what we call theistic evolutionist. They believe in God, and they believe that evolution is the mechanism that came about to create to where we are right now. But the interesting word that I use there is mechanism. Mechanism doesn't change the nature of who God is. And it's the requirement to have something from nothing, which is the real kind of incredible nature of what we believe in God. And even if, of course, it's a really kind of mixed subject. You ask some Christians what they believe, you ask other Christians what they believe. I absolutely, and many others do think that you can be a believer and also believe in the mechanism of evolution bringing us to where we are now. Francis Collins is probably the most famous example. He led the Human Genome Project, and he is a firm theistic evolutionist. And it's a big question. There's so much to unpack. But I think the first kind of bits to think of are, regardless of the mechanism to bring us where we are now, we are something different. We are something set apart from the rest of the animal kingdom based off of our ability to have rationale and reason, morality, ethics, purpose, meaning. All of those things are something different. All of those things come from something other than just our strict development from evolution. And those really do, and they're such strong pointers to the fact that a creator, something outside of us, is putting that on us, is giving that to us, has set us apart and made us different. So we're not just the sum of all of our physical parts. There's something more to us. Secondly, the second part of the question, does it contradict the Bible? The Bible is an incredible, incredible book. In fact, it's Greek for books. So really, it's a collection of different writings, a collection of literature, from poetry to eyewitness accounts, to letters, to books of history, all these different writings that are collected into one book. And it's a real interesting way, an interesting skill to be able to look into and read into the context of what's being written. And so this is kind of where some people might differ in their opinions, and that's absolutely fine. It changes nothing about the true main central message of what the Bible says. But if you go back to some of the early chapters of the book that talks about the beginning story, some people will read into it and see and interpret as that literal 6-day creation, as you'll hear. And some of it read into it and see the world around us and apply that worldview to it. It doesn't take away anything from the power of what the book's saying. It doesn't change anything about the why. It doesn't change anything about the who. It just applies the hermeneutics, is the word, the interpretation, the understanding, and the application of that. And so that's how the different perceptions of that can come about. However, you can absolutely be a credible believer in God and also believe that evolution was the mechanism. That's the key word. You still need an agent for mechanism. You still need a creative mind to think of the laws that will guide evolution. But absolutely, you can still be a credible believer and a credible, evolutionist.
That's so interesting, and
it's a long answer. I apologize.
Hopefully, we've answered everyone's questions within that. And like I said, if you do have any more questions on that, you can join us in the Zoom room following this. But yeah, moving on a little bit from that to something kind of similar. So if God created all things, did the Big Bang happen?
It's really interesting that not that long ago, the main idea about the universe was that it always existed. That it had no beginning, it had no end, it just always was. Recently, the evidence that we've used shows us that the universe had a beginning. And that is just incredible, because for the universe to begin, there has to be something before its beginning. And there has to be something to show that nothing existed and then something existed. And that's where I think, absolutely, there can be a Big Bang. The scientific evidence points towards it. There's so much to show that the Big Bang is the way that the universe has started. And this is a real kind of key thing, is that faith and science, they work together beautifully, because we can know and understand the fact that if the world is created, if the universe is created, and we're in the same kind of being able to understand and think about it and put laws in place and put all these kind of different numbers and examples of what's going on in the universe, then we must be able to be in the same rationale as the mind that is behind it. And that kind of thing of being able to know and understand the universe is something that's so, so interesting, because it's something that only we as humans are able to do. And so again, I think that's something that sets us apart, that sets us from something different from the rest of the animal kingdom. But anyway, moving back to Big Bang, absolutely, there's no reason why you can not believe in the Big Bang if you're a Christian. Absolutely, I believe in the Big Bang. I think it's the way the universe started, and it points to the most important, real, crucial aspect, which is the universe did start. It had a beginning. We can't tell what was before that beginning, because that's outside the realms of what science is able to do. And so there has to be something from where there was nothing to then something. And that has never happened before, apart from that instance, will never happen again. We can't recreate it. It can't be something that can be done by natural causes, by natural means. So it has to be an instigator, a starter, something to flick the switch and turn the lights on.
That's really interesting, because I think growing up, you always assume that Christianity and the Big Bang, they just don't work together. So that's really helpful in explaining it and also challenging me, which is always a plus. So on to the next question, which is on a kind of slightly different path, but related to what we've just talked about. So should scientific subjects exclude topics like evolution and the Big Bang?
So this is actually a really, really great question, mainly because you think of the way we study science, and it can so often be thought of as you have to do repeated experiments, and you have to have a hypothesis and then get samples, use that, analyze the data, and then come out with the results, and be able to show other people how you did it so they can do it as well. This is only really one type of science, that's called induction. There's another type of science called abduction. Abduction is the method of taking the evidence that we see from past events, from things that have already happened, and putting them together like a puzzle to create a best picture of what we know. And so we look at the evidence for, for instance, the Big Bang. We look at cosmic microwave background radiation, all of that kind of stuff. The reason why we think the universe is expanding, so it must have created from a central place and outwards, all different things like that. Same with evolution, the genetic and fossil records. They're all put together to create a best picture analysis of what we see. And that's equally still science at that point. And that's so, so important. It's so, so necessary, because we use that same process of abduction when we look at who Jesus is. And we have incredible records of the Bible, the gospel eyewitness accounts, talking about who Jesus is, and talking about even after the point of, in the Bible, after the point of Jesus dying and rising again. We have so many different accounts, and we can put them next to each other, on top of each other, work with them, work with the events that have already happened, and put together a best picture analysis. And working with that, my firm and many, many people's firm belief is that Jesus was real. He existed. He died under Pontius Pilate, but he also rose again, and he is who he says he is. He was the Son of God, came to reconcile us back to God. And you see, we can use that same process that we use in science of abduction, putting together all the evidence to create a best picture, in the same way that we do when we look at the character of Jesus, when we look at our faith. We can come to understanding the history and the rationale behind Jesus and why it can be true in that same process.
Yeah, I agree. I have nothing to add. We now have one final question, which is, will science be able to explain who God is?
I'm gonna bring you into this one, Amy. Can you guess what I'm talking about? Proteins, cells, nucleotides, bases, water, carbon. What am I talking about?
I'm really not very scientific, so I hope everyone on YouTube really isn't judging me right now. I literally don't know. It could be like a human, or
I'm talking about my mum, obviously. And you see, that's the kind of the interesting bit with what science can tell us. Science can put together all of the mechanical parts of who we are, but can't really tell us who we are. And the same way with, can science tell us who God is? Well, yeah. If we look at the universe and we think, wow, this is massive and it's all ordered and it's all structured, and there are fixed laws in the universe, must be a mind that has made these fixed laws and has made it so it works in a certain way. You know, if I drop this pen, you know what will happen? It drops because there's a fixed law, there's a mind behind what's going on. But that doesn't tell us anything more than just God is a mind. He must be creative and powerful to create this universe, but nothing more than that. And so to actually know God, we have to be able to find out about his character, find out about his nature. Similarly to, if you wanted to know who my mum is, you'd have to speak to her. And we have an incredible way to be able to know who God is, incredible way to be able to find out and investigate the character and the nature of who God is. And I believe that's firmly found in the Bible, in the Gospels, and what they say, the eyewitness accounts of Jesus' life. It's that same reason we say science can't explain everything. Science tells me who my mum is genetically, who she is by her, mechanical makeup, anything to do with that. But it can't tell me anything about her character, about her nature. And it's the same with when we look at God. It can tell us so much about his creativity, his power, his rationale behind the universe, but struggles to tell me anything about his nature. And for that, we have to go somewhere else. We have to go somewhere deeper. We have to go somewhere where it can show us aspects of his love and his care and his also his creative genius in the universe. And that's all found firmly in the Bible.
That's so good, and such a really helpful way of explaining it, even putting me on the spot.
Sorry, I know I didn't need much warning.
Even someone as unscientifically minded as myself could understand that, which is helpful. So that we've come to the end of our questions that you sent in to us. So thank you very much, Pete, for answering those. I found them really enlightening, and I feel like I learned a lot. But just because we've come to the end of answering these doesn't mean that you can't ask any more questions. Pete and I will be in a Zoom room as soon as this video ends. So if you'd like to join, like I said before, message the Cardiff Met Instagram at Cardiff Met CU for the Zoom details, and we will see you there. But also do join us for this evening's talk, where we will be looking at belonging in a broken world, looking at the topic of suffering. So join us on YouTube, so right here at 7:30 tonight. But if you can't join us now in the Zoom room, we will hopefully see you later. Thank you again, Pete. And hopefully we'll see you in a minute.
Awesome.